Welcome back to Next Gen Console Watch, our show following everything happening with the latest gaming hardware, and there is new gaming hardware out this week. I'm Daemon Hatfield, and this episode I'm joined by Max Scoville, host of IGN's PlayStation podcast, Podcast Beyond.
Hello, hello.
And Michael Higham joins us this week. He reviewed the PS5 Pro for IGN and gave it a 7 out of 10. So he spent some time with it. For comparison, the launch PS5, we gave an 8 out of 10. Several years ago now. So, Michael, I think you've spent time with the PS5 Pro. You've given it 7 out of 10. Can you sort of briefly summarize how you feel about the sort of mid-gen upgrade for PS5?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the mid-gen upgrades are relatively new, I guess. Back when the Xbox One X and the PS4 Pro came out, the advent of 4K was upon us, and 4K TVs were becoming more and more the standard. So the upgraded consoles really served a purpose there. So with the PS5 Pro, it's a little bit more... I feel like there's more diminishing returns this time around because we're still in 4K. 8K is... I'm not even thinking about that. 120 hertz is great as a PC gamer. That's an attractive prospect, but that's not really the realm in which console games work in. So you look at the PS5 Pro and you really think about, like, what does this offer? And so what I came away from it is that the performance-based modes look so much better than they do on the base PS5. So the PS5 Pro is kind of you're making your games look prettier and run smoother. Now that said, it's $700. It is not essential. It is a nice to have, which is the last line in my review. But that kind of sums up the entire thing. Is like, if you feel like your base PS5 is sort of lacking from a technical perspective, you play on a big 4K screen, but you want to get those frame rates, and you got to do performance mode, and then things look a little muddied. I think games such as Final Fantasy VII Rebirth that was my favorite example of how a PS5 Pro can really elevate that game and that experience of playing that game. But do you have the money for it? Do you even care that much about it? Those are the kind of questions you really have to ask yourself. Because that's what I was thinking. Like, I'm reviewing this, but like, would I spend the $700? And if money was not an object, I absolutely would, because the difference is noticeable, to me at least. And as someone who has spent a lot of his life, in PC gaming, and, I love upgrading to the next generation of video cards, or I like at least checking out what these new video cards could bring to the table. The expensiveness of PC gaming is kind of normalized, I guess, to someone like me. But like, if you have been a long time console gamer, you look at this and like, well, what do I actually get out of it? There are tangible improvements with games like Alan Wake 2. You're going to see ray tracing, or you can get the quality mode from the base PS5, but with much better frame rates. So there are these tangible improvements. But again, like I said, it's sort of diminishing returns at this point because the PS5 is no slouch. The base PS5 is still a pretty powerful console. And I think most people are going to play the games, enjoy the games for what they are, and not think too hard about whether or not they're getting like better pixel density, or like, I love PSSR. And I think that's such a great advancement from a technical perspective to make games look better than they could have ever looked on a base PS5. But, that's not going to matter to a lot of people. So it's a niche product, and it definitely serves a certain audience. But if you really have to think hard, it's like, oh, am I going to notice a difference? It's probably not going to be for you, and it probably wasn't aimed at you to begin with. But I think it's kind of nice that there's this option with the PS5 Pro, albeit very expensive.
Right.
That's missing a disk drive, that's missing a vertical stand, which are both pretty expensive. It's parts of the PS5 Pro are confusing for sure. I think Sony could have done a better job of rolling this out from various aspects, but at the end of the day, this is what we're getting. It's what I reviewed, and those are some of my top level thoughts.
So Max, from when this PS5 Pro was announced a couple months ago now, we had sticker shock at the price tag, and then a lot of us were sort of frustrated with the lack of a disk drive and lack of a stand and all that. Now that it's here, Max, has your views on PS5 Pro changed at all?
Not really. At some point, maybe I'll be interested in buying one, but I think the big problem here is that there's not really any there's not really any sizzle to go with the steak. Like a piece of hardware is really only as good as the software that you're showing it off with. And the big new game that Sony dropped alongside this was Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, which from what I've been told is a phenomenal remaster, but it's also a game that a lot of people already played, and it's recently enough that I don't particularly want to revisit it yet. Maybe we put up a video of Bloodborne running on the PS5 Pro, and it is the difference is negligible. Like it's barely noticeable, and everyone of course is pointing out like, why can't this run at 60 frames per second? Talking about how Xbox put out a patch for Dark Souls 3 that upped the frame rate for that. We've seen them do that for a few other games, last gen games getting Series X patches that make them really just take advantage of that power. And it doesn't really feel like Sony, there are 50 something games at launch that have PS5 Pro enhancements, but they just don't, it doesn't feel substantial, I would say. It's either more recent games that already look pretty good on a base PS5, or it's just, again, the bottom line is that a new game would really go a long way with getting people excited about this. And from the way it was revealed, alongside footage of Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart and Spider-Man, which apparently both look phenomenal on the PS5 Pro, but they also, they came out a while ago. Like people have played them. They're like, this probably looks as good, on the PS5 Pro as it does in your memory of playing it 3 years ago or whenever that was. And it's, we've got Ghost of Yotei on the horizon. You got Grand Theft Auto 6. Monster Hunter Wild seems like the sort of big, huge, massive game that could really take advantage of this, and they could really use it to showcase the power of it. But this just kind of feels like they dropped it in the middle of, the holiday release schedule, not really attaching anything with it. Like this doesn't really feel like it has any kind of a launch lineup to go with it, or at least not one that's worth getting excited about. And I think that's really not doing it any favors. And that's on top of the fact that, it isn't a huge, massive leap. It's not the jump to 4K or the jump to HDR. It's sort of just it's a nominal bump. And, if that's something that people get excited about, that's cool. If people have money to burn and they held off on buying a PS5 at launch, seems like a no-brainer. But yeah, it's an almost, for me at least.
Well, Michael, after spending time with PS5 Pro, do you find it hard to go back to a base PS5?
I wouldn't say it's hard to go back to a base PS5. Like, I'll live, and like if I gotta send this thing back to the LA office, so be it. I have my own base PS5, and for whatever exclusive that may come in the near future, I'm gonna play it on my base PS5. I'm going to enjoy that game for what it is. So as much as I am that PC nerd who loves playing games at like high graphic settings with high frame rate, at the end of the day, they're the things that I think as I've gotten older, I'm not trying to get like so esoteric here or like
it's good.
High level washed up old man, but I think as I've gotten older, I've come to understand what I value most in games. Things like incredible art styles, great storytelling, interesting gameplay mechanics. Of course, there's a certain level in which I expect games to perform and look, but so long as it meets that standard, which is fairly, reasonable, then I'm playing that game. I'm not thinking too hard about, like I mentioned 7 Rebirth, and I played through that game in graphics mode, 30 FPS, I'll live, but that game looked incredible. There were parts of that storytelling that really hit me, especially with the use of the graphical fidelity, really bringing you into that world and those characters. Like, that's important. But I was able to get that with the compromise of 30 FPS, which, like I said, I'll live. But also at the same time, to Max's point, I'm not going to replay that game anytime soon. And so, like, the PS5 Pro is not going to make me replay that game. I'll replay like a couple hours of it for review, and I was like, wow, this looks incredible. I wish I could have done this the first time around, but I'm not going to do it again because I enjoyed that game for what it is after 80 hours. So, yeah, it's I don't know. It's really weird to think about how I appreciate the technical marvel, the technical aspect of it. That bigger hard drive or the bigger solid state drive is a nice perk on top of, like, to make that price tag a little less shocking, I guess. But at the same time, I'm like, I'll live with the base PS5. If there's a PlayStation exclusive I got to play or really want to play, such as Ghost of Yotei, like, I'm fine doing it on base PS5. But another thing too is if new games come out and they start to be lacking on the base PS5, then the prospect of the Pro might be more enticing. But then that opens up the conversation, like, oh, okay, well, how come you can't optimize for the base PS5? And that's something we're going to explore in the future as more PlayStation exclusives come out. with Pro enhancements already packed in. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But at the same time, I don't expect these high-profile PlayStation exclusives to leave the base PS5 behind, especially because, like, you know, I imagine the Pro isn't going to sell a lot, and I don't think it's projected to sell a lot because it is a niche product. So, yeah, I think the base PS5 is serviceable for what it is. But again, something Max mentioned is that if I never had a PS5 and I'm at the store shelves and I'm like, you know, I got a bonus this week, so I can splurge a little bit. If I'm looking at them side by side and I do care about that fidelity and having the best of the best, the Pro is a good choice still. But not everybody has $700 to burn, and I get it.
Well, you mentioned sales. As of this taping, you know, the PS5 Pro has not sold out. You can get a PS5 Pro from any electronics retailer. Max, what do you sort of expect the reception to be for Sony for this? Because the Portal last year was surprisingly popular.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that they made enough to meet demand, but not so many that they're just sitting there on store shelves, though it kind of seems like that's the case right now. You know, we're still a few weeks out from Black Friday. A lot of people haven't done their holiday shopping yet. I could absolutely see it reaching a point where they're, you know, if they don't have any left, which would be cool. Sony likes to do its bit of goalpost moving when it comes to hardware. You know, they'll come out with sales data for being like the PlayStation VR 2, for instance. They're like, great news, everybody, it sold more than the PlayStation VR 1. Does that mean it sold a lot? I guess relatively in that context, but you know, again, like you said, this is a niche product. Looking at the numbers for the PS4 Pro, I'm not positive on this, but I believe it was around Wii U numbers, which not great historically speaking. And you know, you look at the install base for the base PS4, and it was phenomenal, sold incredibly. Same with the PS5. I could very much see this being one of those odd sort of vestigial, again, mid-gen refreshes. It's somewhere between a PS5 and a PS6, but a lot of people, they don't go for these little side stories. They want to tune in day one for the main installments and then stick around, stay the course on that.
Well, one more thought before we move on. Michael, Sony now has itself the most powerful console available on the market. Do you still expect a similar mid-gen upgrade from Xbox?
I mean, there's a lot of information out there from various sources about what Xbox's plans are, of course. But I don't think, and this is just like, you know, I think Xbox has other priorities. I don't think powerful hardware is of their concern. The Series X is a great piece of hardware. And I remember when I reviewed it back in 2020, I'm like, oh, wow, there's a lot of potential in the Series X. And it's just tapping into it. So I think Xbox has advantages from a hardware perspective, have advantages in some of the other areas that Sony does not, especially with like backwards compatibility and having an extensive library that takes advantage of that extra hardware. You know, I don't think that I haven't played a Series X game where I felt like, maybe this, you know, it's lacking. Maybe it could use a little bit more power. So I don't think it's in the, like I don't think they'll benefit greatly from doing something like that. I don't think it's in their plans because they have other concerns to worry about over on Xbox. And a more powerful Series X doesn't really make sense. It doesn't really necessarily fill a gap that Xbox needs, in my opinion. And you could probably, like, you know, maybe I could have said the same thing about PlayStation. But I think that it depends on what they explore with a new console, if they do it and when they do it, because they're like, not to get to like too into the weeds of technical details, but like PlayStation 5 Pro is exploring PSSR, which is a technology that is going to make games look even better without stressing hardware. And I think this is like a, you know, doesn't get people to buy a PS5 Pro, but like as someone who follows the tech industry and you know, gaming tech, that's kind of a big deal, and that's going to set the stage for how good a PS6 game can look. But of course, that's you know, I'm not going to be like, yo, that PSSR, like that's why you should get a PS5 Pro. Like it's not a selling point really for the masses. It's more of like an interesting thing to dive deep in when you review a thing like this and break it down from a technical perspective. So I think maybe the motivation for putting out a PS5 Pro, there are other reasons why Sony would explore a mid-gen refresh, and I think that might be one of them. Is, you know, test bedding for what the PS6 could possibly be, and while putting out a product that maybe people will be interested in the process of doing that. So
if Microsoft is going to launch new hardware, I would so much rather they compete with Nintendo and Valve than Sony on this front. I would rather get a more portable Series S than a more powerful Series X. I think it's a more interesting product at this point, and it seems like they're very much going in that direction. But I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Well, viewers, are you interested in picking up a PS5 Pro? Did you pre-order one? Are you getting one this week? Let me know in the comments. I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts and what it is about it that most appeals to you. We have a poll for you on that very question in just a moment. But first, here's the results of last episode's poll. We were talking about all the big games that are coming out this fall. Typically, the fall season is when the big games of the year come out. We were asking, is there another type of year? Like, what type of year would you prefer to have all the biggest games coming out? And it turns out it's winter. Winter is what most people picked. 41% went with that. And then the spring is in last place. Less than 10% of the vote. No one wants any big games in spring. They're playing catch up on all the games that they missed from the previous year at that time, I guess. Here's a new poll for you to vote on for next episode. What feature of the PS5 Pro is most interesting to you? It's the higher frame rates, better graphics, the 2 terabyte hard drive. Make sure to vote at IGN.com. The day this episode goes live, we'll share the results with you next episode. And that's going to do it for this edition of Next Gen Console Watch. Thank you to both Max and Michael. Thank you to everyone working behind the scenes here in our LA studio to make this episode possible. My name is Daemon. We'll be back next week with the latest gaming hardware news. We'll see you then.